Hi guys, we're going to be doing another lesson on tenths today, and then eventually we're going to be able to tell which decimal is bigger or smaller. But for now, let's just recap what a tenth is. Okay, so if you remember with my pie, if I coloured in or if I ate one of my pie and I had 10 pieces, if I was to do it as a fraction, it would be 1 over 10 or 1/10. Okay, if I was to write it as a decimal, then it would look, I would have a 0, a point, and a 1. So I'm using that same number from my fraction as I would as my decimal. If I was to eat 3 pieces of my pie, then I could say I ate 3/10 of my pie. And how I write it as a decimal is I would have a 0 and, or a point, 3. Okay, now I have done my 0.3 here, just without the table. But if I was to fill it in the table, I would fill it in something like this. I would have a 0, my point, and in the tenths column, because I know it's the tenths, because it's at a tenth, it's not a whole yet, I know I have eaten 3/10 of my pie. I haven't eaten a whole number yet. Okay, so that's what we've got to so far. Let's just do a couple more just to refresh our memories. What if I had eaten 5/10 of my pie? What if I had eaten 5/10 of my pie? How would that look as a decimal? So not a fraction, as a decimal. Can you write it down for me? So if you wrote a 0.5, you are correct. Well done. What if I ate 6 pieces of my pie? How much of my pie would I... Oh, actually, before we do that, I'm going to write my 0.5 in the table, or 5/10 in the table is how we should be saying it. What if I did 6? What if I ate 6 pieces of my pie? How would I write that as a decimal? Could you show me that now? Okay. If you wrote 0, a decimal point, and a 6, you would be correct. Well done. I'm going to fill that in my table here. Beautiful. Okay, let's do a bigger number. Let's say I ate nearly all my pie. I ate 9/10 of it. I haven't eaten the whole thing yet. I've only eaten 9/10 of my pie. So how would that look as a decimal? Have a go. If you wrote a 0, a decimal point, and a 9, you would be correct. Well done. Excellent work. Okay, I'm going to write 0.9. Now, have a think. If I ate all the pieces of my pie, all of them up, have I eaten a whole pie yet? Have I? Yes. So if I've eaten a whole pie, that would mean that it would be 1. I've eaten one whole pie. Now, because it's a whole number, it's one whole pie, I would be putting a 1 in the ones column because I haven't eaten part of my pie. I've eaten the whole thing. So it'd be 1. And if you want, just to make it look, you can put it a 0 there because you haven't eaten any other pieces, have you? You've only just eaten the one whole pie. Okay. Okay, now we're going to start reading this. I want to show you how we usually start reading these decimals. So yes, this is 9/10. Okay, when we're reading them out with the decimal place, this is how we usually read them. We go 0 and 3/10, 0 and 5/10, 0 and 6/10. Have you noticed a pattern? 0 and 9/10, and then 1. Or you could also say 1 and 0/10. Okay, so that's how we usually read it. So we read the 0 when we have the decimal point. We used to say point, but now we say end. So the point, the decimal point there is representing of the word end. And then we read 3/10. Okay, all right. I'm going to read out some now, and we'll say some now. I want you to try and write it down for me. So if I said 0 and 5/10, what would that look like as a decimal? 0 and 5/10. Okay, if you wrote 0, a decimal point, and a 5, you would be correct. Now have a go with this one. 0 and 2/10. 0 and 2/10. It would be 0 and 2/10. Okay, because remember, when there's the decimal point there, we say end. Okay, this time I'm going to say a bigger one. 0 and 8/10. 0 and 8/10. How would you write that one? If you wrote a 0, a decimal point, and an 8, you would be correct. On the next slide, I'm going to say some decimals like I just did before, 0 and 5/10 or 0 and 3/10, and I want you to write them down. Now you can write them, type them in the computer on the slide, or you could just write them on a piece of paper and then post the piece of paper on that slide. Okay, and then we'll go to the next part. Great job.